Okay, welcome to tonight's evening. This information comes courtesy of a chap called Paul Jenkins, and Paul is just an enthusiastic amateur, but he goes to all of the instinctive golf trainings. He's been with us at the golfing machine. And he really is a very passionate, enthusiastic man. And he sends me this stuff, which again, we need to put this on. I'll put this on the YGA and encourage everybody else to do this. And obviously, if once we find out about these sites, then we can do one at a time rather than have all of these to watch. So I started to watch them, and I think I watched about 4 or 5. And really, all I did was take little snippets from here and there. So I think that the first thing that I sort of agreed with what Marcel said before is that there was it's just what we're doing and what we're doing already to some degree, but there were some interesting snippets, and something that I mentioned before. We've got so many of these psychologists, and they're talking about how people learn, both how their psychology affects them, and also how their physiology affects them when learning, i.e. how to practice, and the difference between block practice and random practice. And we've talked a little bit about this. So what I told you about a couple of weeks ago was when I took, or about 6 weeks ago, when I took a lady to Spain, was that I had to do an awful lot of preparing her to learn with her state management. And again, the guy that really annoyed the hell out of me today was the pressure guy. Because this guy went on about their pain, and they've got this pain, and and they can't get rid of the pain, and they get this relief, and you're going, oh my God! If this guy was talking to me, I'd be committing suicide. I mean, it really was to me a really huge example of psychology actually building negativity, in that the words that he used, how he used the words, how he took everything about them and made it a negative. It was quite frightening for me. So I think there's a lot of, but what it also does, obviously, is tells me how poor our language is still, and how. So I don't believe in a lot in what he said, for a start. So I'm going to go through that. But I believe anyway that within language, within the capability of language, we can reframe a lot of these things. So he said something like, people are worried about hitting a poor shot, and a poor shot can bring them down. Well, but he never talked about how we could reframe poor shots, and how we could make a poor shot a learning experience, for instance. So I always remember I was having lessons off George Will, the late George Will, and I had 100, and I scored 102, and I was really trying on that. So I tried on every single shot, and then the next week I shot 72 because of the learnings that I made from hitting the 102. And this was 30 years ago, and even then, emotion wasn't getting in my way. So I think that going back to getting the client ready to learn, I thought of the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and the the be proactive. So it seems to me that the psychologists are busy fighting fires, but if we are proactive in the work that we do, then we can prevent an awful lot of firefighting. Now, I'm not necessarily saying we get a huge opportunity to do this, but for me, we need to look at the psychology of the client and the philosophies of the client before we can even begin to teach them. So in other words, if we can't get them into a good learning state before they even start, how are they going to take everything on board? If we don't get them to understand that the game of golf, every single joy is in the processes and not in the outcome, that all learnings are from running the process and then getting the feedback from those processes to see what they could do differently next time, leaving out all of this emotion that causes pressure. So, I've always said that for a long while, that with pressure you can deal with it two ways. You always practice under pressure so that it's the same when you get to the golf course, or you don't have any pressure and then you don't have to worry about it. So you manage your state so you don't have pressure. Now, they were talking an awful lot, so throughout everything they've talked about the difference between practice on the range and practicing on the course, and that random practice. So along the same lines as practice under pressure to be ready for pressure, then I thought, well, this is just an idea that came out of my head this morning, that what if we were to make the imagery part of each shot the same? So what if we took it to disassociated to black and white? So in other words, once we picked our target, we turn that image on our head to black and white, we change the state to fearless, and then we just go. And then how can we ever feel pressure? We can only feel pressure if we decide that each shot has to be added to the next shot. Well, that isn't, everything we know about pre-shot routine states the different, that's it, that's your experience. The pre-shot routine is your experience. Once that experience is done without emotion, then you go on to the next experience and you enjoy that whole experience. So I think that, again, a little bit like what I said with the random and the random block and random, that, well, how can we look at how we can make block practice more exciting or more similar to what happens on the golf course? So how can we make block practice random? Now, they talked a lot about preparation for the shot, working out what to do. There was a really good piece on I think it was on Andy's. The guy I said was pretty good, and it was a quote from Anders Ericsson, K. Anders Ericsson, on deliberate feedback. And he said, I think, the engagement is done with complete focus in an activity designed to improve an aspect of performance, with instant feedback opportunities for gradual refinement by repetitions and finding solutions. So this guy raved about this guy and said, he's everything, this is the man, he's the man, this is the man to pay attention to. Now, we've got a sheet, or you've got a sheet in your manual that does every single step of that. It's got every single step covered in more detail than he's written that. Now, what I realised is it only includes your personal stuff. It doesn't include how you get your client into that quality state. And what I'm saying is that we need to be proactive in training them and getting to think correct philosophically before we even start to work with them. There's a whole aspect going through all of the motor learning ones about the fact that first we have to understand, then we practice, then we get feedback, and then we go and play. Now for me, if everyone's saying that we don't learn until we get to the course, that everything's about the course, then still there was only one that fractionally mentioned it. Nobody's actually saying that they go and supervise the play. So they're saying that the practice should be supervised, and then they get to the level where they go off and practice on their own. Then they say play, but really surely it should be play under supervision before they go and play on their own. Hold on, you've just had 15 conferences all saying this stuff, and nobody is really getting out there and finding a solution. This and again, one of the guys said the goal. He said, whatever you say, the goal is to put the ball in the hole. Well, no, it's not. That's not the goal. That's part of the task, but the goal is to enjoy the process of pre-shot routine and enjoy the walk in between. And if we don't get that over in the first place, then every single thing that they talk about will come and haunt us. So again, I go back. We've got to start being very proactive about the game of golf and how we talk about the game of golf, how we talk about learning, how we lay down philosophies that will support people playing great golf. Another thing one of the guys said, again, these are guys that are supposedly, got these huge reputations. He said that the handicap has stayed stationary at 17. So what basically saying that the average handicap all those years ago was 17, and now the average handicap is still 17. And this is obviously despite the advances in ball, club, equipment of all sorts, even shoes, gloves, everything's got better, the courses have got better, the bunkers are better rate, the greens are better, everything's better. But he said this is down to practice, that it hasn't improved. Well, what an outrageous statement. What an absolutely outrageous statement for him to go. So these people are, they're standing up on their balls and they're saying this is the reason for this. Well, that's just preposterous. How can practice alone be responsible? It's again, what is it that's going on here that people just use whatever piece of information there is and just, take it to their own means? Because I just don't know. I just don't know. I think that there was a lot of great little comments as well. So let's go and talk about the good stuff. So they were talking about, I think it was Poulter was questioned, and he said, he was asked, so how do you, you're so intense when you're on the golf course, when you're in that Ryder Cup situation, you really give, how do you practice that? And he said, look, everything is a game. So again, this is very much along the instinctive golf ideas that, the more that we can make it a game, the more that we can make it playful, the more that we're challenging ourselves, the more that we're challenging the brain to come up with solutions, to pay attention and to notice, and therefore go forward. Just a tiny little one. There is a book called Fearless Golf. I can't remember the full title. I will look it up. I was trying to find it in my bookcase, but I've obviously lent it out to somebody. But for me, again, the only way to play golf is fearlessly. So before we even start teaching the swing, we better start to understand how we can make sure that people are fearless on the golf course, so that you know, their muscles are working smoothly and the energy is working smoothly. There's a couple of other things that that I came upon. So the language was there, and I think that's very NLP based. So I think that you know, we definitely need to get these NLP skills so we can conquer that part of it. Practice needs to be managed. Change needs to be managed. These were themes that were going through it. As far as I'm concerned, the biggest thing that I can give you is the proactive habit. So in other words, rather than go and fight fires, start sorting this stuff out before you go anywhere. We've got to reduce expectancy levels and explain expectancy levels and get them into pre-shot routines. There was a lot of equipment. They were talking a lot about equipment, and one of the places, the Bishopsgate Academy, was talking about the fact that, you know, they had the body check vest, they had TrackMan, they had video cameras, and I think that we probably need to start thinking about how we can share equipment. Now, it's probably a little bit hard for you guys in Norway and Holland, but you know, I think that in the UK, I think that there is something to be said from maybe us opening up an indoor golf school where people can teach, and then getting 4 or 5 people together that can all teach there and use that facility, and then share the equipment and the costs of the equipment. So I think that's something that I'm going to start to look at. We need to do a bit more business before I could take a risk and put one, let's say, in somewhere in London where all of the coaches could take their clients 24 hours and use that equipment. But I definitely think that, you know, having some sort of database of who's got TrackMan, who's got force weight mats, who's got, you know, high definition recording materials, I think that that would be very useful to know, and for to put out there that it could be shared. Okay, so what I think what I'm going to do now is I will maybe go away and find out how to put them in that Dropbox, and then watch the whole thing, and then come back very specifically on each one of the videos and pick out what we think could be important, because I think there probably is, there's some things in there that could be important that we don't know, and of course as soon as I find something that I don't know, then, you know, I like to play with it. So hopefully that will work out fine. Yeah, that's it. I have nothing more to say.